This time I'll call the meeting in the Marshall City Council to order with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening. We do have an agenda for us. Moving to agenda item number 2. Are there any changes to that agenda? If not, we'll move to agenda item number 3, which would be to consider approving the minutes of the last regular council meeting that was held on January 9th, 2018. Council does have those minutes. Are there any corrections to note?
Move approval.
Motion by Jim, seconded by Craig, to approve the minutes as they have been presented. We'll move to a vote.
Did you just get here?
I did.
Sorry, Jim, I made it in just under the wire.
At least you made it.
I made it.
The motion passes. So now we'll move to agenda item number 4. Agenda item number 4 is a public hearing. This is a public hearing on the ordinance amendment that would change the deck projections that is required for yards and ordinance. And so we'll have a public hearing on this. Following public hearing, we will consider the adoption of that ordinance. So I will call on our assistant city engineer to Jason Anderson to conduct this public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor.
And I'll have you move the microphone real close. So.
The existing ordinance requires a 25-foot front yard along the street for houses, but does allow for decks to project 6 feet into the required front yard. Regulations in other cities that we've looked at, some allow no projection, some allow up to 10 feet of projection. Based on our review, we're recommending that we revise the yard projection for decks from 6 feet to 8 feet. At the December 13th Planning Commission meeting, they recommended adoption of this amendment by a 6-0 vote. And at the December 28th meeting, the L&O Committee also recommended approval. So I think that's all I've got to say about this topic.
Okay. As part of the public hearing, is there any input from either the Legislative Ordinance Committee or the Planning Commission? Not. Is there any member of the public that wishes to speak as part of this public hearing?
The only feedback or acquaintance I have with this is the lake property. And at that time, the ordinances up there have it so that you cannot have your decks projecting out past the neighbors so that their visibility looking out to the sides, that you block it. And so I was concerned about the one that was put up on the corner of Redwood and A. They projected it way out, but it looks like it's only as far out as the other homes down the line. It's not past that, but it's certainly past where it used to be because there wasn't a deck out there. So I think we should kind of remember that you've got visibility things when you're looking out from your yard to the neighbor's yard on either side.
I know those were factors that were discussed at Legislative and Ordinance Committee and Planning Commission. Any other input as part of this public hearing?
I have a quick question, Jason. It says 8 feet from the front of the house, correct? Mm-hmm. So if the house is set 30 feet back from the right-of-way, which is 5 feet farther normally, they still cannot project farther than 8 feet, correct?
8 feet into the required front yard.
So if they're back 30 feet, they can project out 13 feet, per
Correct.
se, as this ordinance is written.
Correct.
Good clarification.
Any other input as part of the public hearing?
I move we close the public hearing.
Motion by Craig. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by John to close the public hearing. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. We'll now consider the ordinance that would adopt this change. Are there any questions about the ordinance? If not, is there a motion?
I'd move the ordinance to adopt the change.
Second.
Motion by John, seconded by David. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 5. Agenda item number 5 is a consent agenda. We'll bring the items up on the consent agenda on the screen. Those items include consider the approval of the resolutions expressing appreciation for the retiring city employees, consider the application for on-sale intoxicating liquor license for Holy Redeemer Church for an event April 14th, consider the application for exempt permit for Holy Redeemer Church for April 14, 2018, consider the application for exempt permit for Shades of the Past for June 2nd, 2018, consider the authorization to declare vehicles as surplus property for the Marshall Police Department. Consider the authorization for the approval of the Southwest Minnesota Chemical Assessment Team to apply for a hazardous materials emergency planning grant funds from the state of Minnesota and Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and considering calling for the hearing on the Small Cities Development Grant application, and finally consider the approval of the bills and the project payments. So is there any item any member of the City Council wants removed from the consent agenda for separate discussion?
12.
Any other item? If not, we will move agenda item number 12 off of the consent agenda.
I move the approval of the consent agenda as modified.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by John. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item 13, which was the agenda item number 12. Jim?
I just wanted to abstain from that for conflict of interest.
Any other questions about agenda item number 13? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by John. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. We'll note the abstention. Agenda item number 14. Agenda item number 14 is consider the acceptance of the financial donation from the John and Esther McLaughlin Foundation. We have a resolution accepting the donation, and I'd like to ask Mark Clay to come forward and, or, oh,
I move removing the item from the table.
Second.
motion by Craig, seconded by David to remove this item from the table. This was actually tabled at a previous meeting. Discussion on that motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. So we will now consider the resolution that would accept the donation. I'd like to ask Mark Clay on behalf of the recipient as well as a good friend of the family.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yes, on behalf of the McLaughlin family, they are pleased to announce that $20,000 donation to the Veterans Memorial. I know Jack, I had conversation with Jack over the last couple of years about the Veterans Memorial. And if you knew Jack and his family, they're very engaged in the community, business owner, his employees and his family. He was dedicated soul to Marshall too. And as a personal friend, my dad worked for him for a number of years. He was my godfather, just a great man. And, you know, I think it's an honor for us to get that donation from that family. And I think it's carrying Jack's legacy on too. He was a very giving man, very kind man. I'm just proud to accept it for them and to give it to you guys, to the city too. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Well said. I would entertain a motion for the acceptance for the.
I'll be glad to make that motion, and
Yes.
I would have a question for Chief Clayton.
Okay.
We need a second.
I'll second it.
Motion by David, seconded by Craig. Now discussion.
Mark, where can you give us an idea where we are in the design phase of the project?
We're in, right now, we're talking with our administrator, along with Scott. We will start moving forward. I did tell our new administrator that I want this project started this spring. So that's where it's at right now. I can't tell you exactly where we're at because we're still trying to figure out where the finances are at. I will tell you it's going to be scaled way back from the original proposal because we're only going to build with the money that we have. And then it'll be able to be added on to as more donations come in.
At some point, I'd like to follow up with you on that, just out of personal interest. So, thank you very much.
Other discussion on the motion? Well, once again, I, reinforce Mark's statement in that this is a significant contribution from a very significant person in our community's history. No other discussion? We'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 15. Agenda item number 15, consider a resolution approving the 2018 Marshall Pay Equity Report. With us tonight is Sheila Dubbs, Human Resources Director for City of Marshall.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight, I'd just like to talk with you a little bit about our pay equity report. I did provide some materials in your background packets, but I would like to highlight some of the points with you this evening. A little bit about the law. In 1984, the Minnesota legislature passed the Local Government Pay Equity Act. And this requires all jurisdictions, all public jurisdictions in Minnesota to comply with the law, and that would be cities, counties, and school districts. This law, the Pay Equity Act, does not apply to businesses like Schwann's, ADM, grocery stores, restaurants, or other small businesses, just public jurisdictions. The law requires all public jurisdictions to eliminate any sex-based wage inequities in compensation and then to submit the reports on a 3-year cycle. Pay equity is a method of eliminating discrimination against women who are paid less than men for jobs requiring comparable levels of expertise. The law does not address individual differences in pay. Rather, it relates to the overall structure of our pay system. The law also does not take into account the job market or other organizations' salary data. The statistical analysis of this is based solely on our internal compensation structure. The required report for 2018 has been prepared for submission, and I did put that into your packets. It is required to be submitted to the state by January 31st. If we would fail to submit a report, there are penalties that the state will apply to us. The penalty is $100 a day or a 5% reduction in local government aid, whichever is greatest, and that penalty continues until the city achieves compliance. The good news is that our report indicates that we are in compliance with the pay equity requirements, and therefore I have no budgetary recommendations and there are no financial consequences to the city. There are 4 tests for compliance with the Pay Equity Act. The statistical calculations are performed by the software. Those are not performed by the city, by me. The Minnesota Management and Budget Office has the software. We upload the data into that, and the statistics come to us in the reports that are in your background materials. The predicted pay report often generates questions. I went back to our prior report, and this was on the consent agenda, and it was pulled off. There were questions about that. So I'd like to just highlight a couple of things about the predicted pay report. When you're reviewing that, you will note that the maximum monthly salary column does not reflect actual employee salaries. For instance, you'll see some of the job classes where we have part-time employees. The software requires us to bring that to a full-time equivalent. So the employees that you see in the part-time classifications are not paid those monthly salaries. It's just part of the software requesting that we convert all of the minimums and the maximums to full-time equivalents. And that's how the software does the comparisons. The predicted pay column and the pay difference column also create some confusion sometimes. Those two columns are used by entities when they're out of compliance with pay equity. Because we are not out of compliance, we do not need to use those columns and no further action is needed. If we were out of compliance, we would use the pay difference column to guide compensation adjustments to get back into compliance to improve the underpayment ratio. The predicted pay column does not represent a salary that should be paid to any employee at any particular point, level, or account for external factors or salaries. It's simply to bring an out-of-compliance community back into compliance by adjusting by the dollar amount, and that's a monthly dollar amount, is not an hourly dollar amount. The pay equity compliance ratio that we needed to meet was 80 or above. We have met that. Ours is at 148.57, so there are no compensation requirements adjusted for our purposes. When I do submit the report to the state following your approval, we will also need to send proper notices. We need to post it in City Hall, and we need to send proper notices to each of the unions, and I will take care of that. There is a resolution in your packets, and I would request approval of that so that I can submit to the state prior to the deadline.
Thank you, Sheila, and thank you for very thorough work on that analysis. Questions for Sheila?
When we compare the salaries here, a lot has to do with the job points that are awarded.
That is correct.
And pretty much our pay scale, our salary schedule for each of the employees, and this whole pay study depends a lot on the accuracy of the points that are assigned to each of the positions. So if the points that are assigned are inaccurate, then our salary schedules and the study are not going to be accurate either. There's going to be flaws in them.
There could be flaws in them, yes. The points are driven by the Pay Equity Act. All of the public jurisdictions in Minnesota are required to point the positions.
Sure. One of the concerns that I had when I was reviewing the schedule here is with regard to some of the positions here. And when I look at and I don't know if you wanted to bring this up or not, but on the overhead there, but the Director of Community Services has 654 points, and the Finance Director has 805 points, which is 150 points more. And yet the salary schedule for the Finance Director is lower than that of the Director of Community Services. And the same is true of the Director of Public Services. The Director of Public Services has 200 points more than the Director of Community Services, and yet has a lower pay scale. And I think on the one page too, when it compared to the pay differences with regard to the Director of Community Services, the monthly salary was $1,282 higher. The maximum was $1,282 higher than the predicted salary for that position. So it appears to me that there's something wrong with the salary schedule for the Director of Community Services. Either the points that are being awarded are wrong, or the salary schedule is way too high for that position. When I look at the other positions and the points, they all seem to be pretty much in line with where they're supposed to be. But that one sticks out as way off. And I think it would be a good idea for you to look into this matter and then report back to the City Council as to, if there are problems with the salary schedule or the job points being awarded, but something doesn't seem right. And I think it's important for you to maybe look into that and report back to the council.
If I could respond to that now, during the last compensation study, which was in 2011 and 2012, we did a job pointing of that position in 2011, and then we studied the market in 2012. The pointing is correct. We submitted the job description, and that has not changed over time. It's the same job description. When you go through the pointing of a position, the marrying of the market salaries aren't always consistent with other positions. And for that position, in our compensation study that was done, the council approved for a market adjustment to be done for that. What we did was we studied like positions, and they were difficult to find. So we surveyed school districts, and we surveyed communities that had programs similar to ours. Hutchinson would be one that has a joint powers agreement similar to ours. So we did do an extra survey for that specific position and look to get it in the range that the school districts with comparable programs, a comparable position, because that position is normally in a school district, we looked to marry the points with what they were also paying. So we did survey that position, and the council approved for the adjustment to be a market adjustment, which brought it off of the typical line, as you indicated. It brought it off of that. But we needed to keep it comparable with what the market was doing.
But then you're saying this in this salary schedule that we're preparing or sending out here, the pay scale study, we're not allowed to consider market conditions.
This Pay Equity Act doesn't consider market conditions. Our compensation structure can.
But that makes it kind of difficult for us, because in one case we're saying you can't consider the market conditions. In the other situation, you have to consider the market conditions. I mean, how do you balance
there
those
is
two?
some give and take with balancing a compensation study and market data against the points. Back at that point in time as well, we were still in compliance with pay equity as we are today. If we found that we were not in compliance, and the pay equity scenarios are run during the compensation studies. So if we are running into a problem where we are close to the 80 or under 80, we do need to make adjustments as we're going through a compensation study.
Can I add to that?
Go ahead, Sharon.
We do have to consider when there's pay adjustments for male positions, how it would affect the pay equity report. Not for females, because this pay equity is get female-based jobs into the range. So I think Sheila was explaining that, and you were following up on that, is that if we did a lot of market adjustments with male positions, we may want to test it to see if we're still in compliance with pay equity. It appears we're well over compliance at this point. It doesn't hurt that your finance director and your city administrator are female. That helps your pay equity compliance greater than it did prior. But we would need to look at that if we were closer, as Sheila stated. So there's some correlation there.
Thank you.
What I'm looking at here, if we had a comparable position that had 654 points and it had a female, and here we have a male at 654 points, and he's making substantially more than that person would have, then it looked like there's a problem. And anyway, when they did the point study here, don't they look at things like that, or do they not consider the markets?
When you're doing the pointing portion, the pay equity does not come into effect. It's when you're doing the compensation.
No, but don't they consider
portion
the
of
difficulty
study.
of the position and what the market forces are? And
not market. It looks purely at the job description when you're pointing a position.
Then that makes it somewhat of a flawed market system, or a job point system, if it doesn't consider market conditions. I mean, certain positions, whether they're male or female, you need to consider the market conditions, the supply and demand, and how hard it is to fill that particular position. And like I said, when I look at all of the other positions, they pretty much are in line with job points, but this one's way off, and it's a glaring difference. And I thought it should be looked at because
it was during the last study as well. You made the same point the last time that we brought the report to the council.
So I'm consistent.
Yep.
That's good. That's always good.
That's good.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Sheila? I think we're fortunate that we have a human resource director that is that thorough and provide, thorough answers to complex questions.
I move adoption of the resolution approving the 2018 pay equity report for submission to the state.
I'll second.
Motion by Craig, seconded by John. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 16.
Mr. Mayor, I think I accidentally exited out of this. So can you get me back? It was
Sheila, are we pointing that position?
Sorry. I was so riveted by the conversation on pay equity, I got flustered.
Good comeback. Nice save.
It's this side of the table. There's a gremlin over here.
I think I know what he looks like.
2 seats down.
It's kind of a larger fellow.
Gremlins are usually compact, too.
They're easier to hide.
Okay, so agenda item number 16, consider the resolution authorizing the transfer and the closure of the construction fund 409. So with this is Finance Director Carla Drown. Carla.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Before you tonight, you have a resolution of transferring the remaining funds in the construction fund that relates directly to our Tallgrass liquor store construction of the building, and then also to close that fund once transfer is made. You'll notice that I had stated not an exact amount in the resolution. I have some of the funds in a money market account, so it's continuing to increase in interest, so accrue interest. So once you approve it, I'll move that, all of it, including any interest accrued since I have done the paperwork. So I didn't want to conclude myself or confine myself to only that amount to move. So that's why I added that wording actually in the resolution.
Very good. Questions for Carla?
We're talking about a substantial amount of money here being transferred and out of the construction fund into the debt service fund. Could you maybe refresh my memory as to why there's so much money left over?
Okay, so I'm not familiar with all the history. There was a bond that was created or bought to do this construction, and the construction is all completed. I'm not sure if there's been changes to the construction. I don't know if Jason can help me with that or not.
I'm not prepared to answer that question.
I didn't think so.
In other words, the
I would have to follow up on that with you.
contracted amount, though, was less than the amount that was financed. So, and the sale of the old store is not included or is included.
The sale of the old store is not included in this amount. That is already in our bond debt service, and
So this is the good news here. The project was under budget, and the amount of that under budget is being applied to the debt that was obligated for this project.
Again, in reading through the materials a little bit, so the city owned the land. We leased it to the Economic Development Authority, and then they leased it back to us.
That's probably a Dennis question.
You're right. It's just a moving of the, technical ownership, just as if, private company creates an LLC to lease from themselves. And that's what I do at my office. I have my business entity and a real estate entity. Exactly the same thing happened here.
Well, and this was all, the other factor here was there was the land swap on part of the property with Runnings.
It was done that way, and this revenue lease bond was kind of a new financing mechanism that was used successfully on this project.
Basically, it was done to meet the requirements of the bond issue then?
Yes.
Okay.
And the revenue.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
John?
Yeah, and just to recall too, from what I remember at discussion EDA, this was the most economical way in this particular case of doing the bonding. So that's why it was referred to as an EDA bond in that case rather than a general revenue bond or something of that nature. So it was processed this way, which snowball effect of all the other changes and the EDA basically taking and leasing it back to the city. It was just that was a cost savings in the bond issue.
And because it wasn't it was a revenue bond, not a general obligation bond. And would that affect our bond rating then? That would help us get a better bond rating because the less general obligation debt then?
Correct.
Okay.
Less interest involved. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So, just so I understand this, we're about $406,000 left over in the construction bond, correct?
That is correct.
And that'll go into the debt service bond to be used for debt repayment in July 1st of 2022 or 2022 there.
2022, yes. Those funds will go into the debt service accruing interest, and on December 1st, 2022, those lease revenue bonds are callable.
We can pay off that debt early.
And our intent is to work at paying that debt off early.
How much is in the liquor store debt service fund?
Currently, right now, is the sale of the building, which is $241,828 as of December 31st, 2017.
We'll add $406,203 to this, which comes to 600 and some.
Mm-hmm.
So on December 22nd, on the $1.9 million left, we'll make a $600,000 payment, correct?
Plus any interest
yes. Roundabout numbers.
Right.
So then we'll lower that debt to $1.3 million and lower our interest costs.
Well, and actually the projection in the budget
right.
For 2018, as well as hopefully moving forward beyond that, would have a balance that would fully satisfy that.
And that's good. I like to say not spending the money. I like that we're putting it in the fund.
Staff's intent is to put money away each year to when it comes due that we're able to pay that bond off in full.
And I'd be happy for the paper to get all those numbers so they can print that tomorrow. So.
One last question. We borrowed more money than we needed, and now we're going to invest that money.
That is correct.
And do we have any concern about the arbitrage laws as far as if we earn more on our investments that we're paying on interest on the obligation? Is that something we've checked into and make sure that we're okay with? Or
I will double check with our consultant. We should be okay, though. We paid it down and spent it down further in the time frame, so we should be fine on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? If not, you have the resolution before you. I'd entertain a motion.
Move the resolution.
Motion by Craig, seconded by Jim for the resolution transferring the balance of the construction account and closing the construction fund. Discussion on that motion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 17. Agenda item number 17, consider the replacement of a sewer camera under the Department of Wastewater. With us tonight is Bob Van Moore. Bob is superintendent of our wastewater facility.
Good evening. This is more of an informational item. In 2018, we had budgeted $75,000 to replace our sewer televising camera system. That was the existing camera we have was purchased in 2001, and it's completely shot. They don't repair the parts anymore or anything else like that. So we currently have an Aries brand system, and that's what we looked at as far as a replacement. And these are state contract bids on these. The Aries rep is from St. Joseph, Minnesota. He handles parts locally. He does service on them locally. So it's very easy for us to get repairs and parts from an Aries brand supplier. Some of the other bigger suppliers are out of Florida and different parts of the country. So we had very good luck with our Aries system, and so we'd like to stay with that. We had them come out, demonstrate the unit, newer model. The models that we're looking at actually came in about $10,000 less than was budgeted. We're able, by staying with an Aries brand camera, we can use some of the parts off of our old ones, the wheel kits. It's about $8,000 that we wouldn't have to purchase on a new system, so that's another good advantage of it. That state contract expired January 1st, so right now they're still honoring the state contract pricing, but that could change any time, so we are trying to kind of get a move on this and get it purchased. That state contract was put out in August of 2013, so they haven't increased their prices for like 4.5 years on this thing, so it's an excellent buy for us. We don't have just the final details down. We're still working on fine-tuning what parts we need, and then we're looking at trading in our existing system. We may be able to get $3,000 to $4,000 trade-in on our old equipment. So just an informational item. I didn't know if you needed us to come back with a full proposal, the final quotes or anything like that, but I think for our best interest would be knowing it's going to be around that $65,000 range, if we would just have the permission to go ahead and purchase that once we get everything finalized.
Questions for Bob?
Bob, that's in, I mean, you've got that in your budget.
Yes, I actually budgeted $75,000 for 18. So
really what you're looking for is authorization to proceed with it.
Yeah, yep.
I would make that motion to authorize proceeding.
Motion by Craig, seconded by David. Discussion. Carla, do you have any concerns on that procedure?
I have any concerns. As Bob said, it is budgeted in our wastewater department budget, and it will be coming out of the revenues generated this year. So,
Sharon, you're okay with this?
Yes.
Any other discussion?
I'm going to parrot the kind of the same kudos I usually give, is that we're pretty fortunate here, and obviously this is both one of my former trades in a much smaller version, but also it's one of my involvements on my day-to-day job is engaging with the municipal water and wastewater programs. And the services that our Public Works, our wastewater group, provide with the collection system and maintenance, I think that the city needs to take a lot of pride, and we need to put out to the public as often and as loudly as we can that those of us who have lived here for 25 plus years and went through those floods in '93 and some of the other heavy rainstorms, and the difference in how our collection system for the wastewater and the stormwater program has changed and substantially lessened the impact to public and private property is phenomenal. And it's because of the projects, upgrades to our system, all that infrastructure. It's the capital investments that both the city and the municipal utilities has put into our infrastructure. So when we're doing streets, and that we're not just doing the streets, and then once we get that new infrastructure in, it's the wastewater collection and the treatment plant staff that are doing that maintenance and upkeep. The camera is absolutely paramount for being able to identify problems before they become problems, to verify that the maintenance work they're doing in there, the jetting, the cleaning, is actually functioning, and finding any of the problems before they actually give us some kind of a liability. One of the reasons why we get good rates on our insurance through the League of Minnesota Cities Insurance Trust is the fact that our maintenance program is good and our claims history is improved. So it all cascades in a very positive way for the city. And I just want to commend Bob and all that staff. And I can tell you that not only does it look good for Marshall, but we stand out in the state with those folks as one of the premier water, wastewater departments in the state. They're highly respected and sought after for their input. It's a reason why a lot of those guys are on the state committees and planning groups, is because of their knowledge and their expertise, and I just want to thank them for that.
Thank you, Craig. Any other questions or
What's the life expectancy on the camera then?
Yeah, I would say probably 10 years is a good life for something like that. Yeah, it's a high maintenance item, and we've got a good life out of our old one. So
Puts a lot of miles on in those dirty pipes.
Yeah, it does.
We also seen that. If you ever get the chance to go out with, does Larry still do a lot of the videotaping?
A couple of the other guys are doing a lot of it. I don't know if you guys ever seen these or not, but I do have just a couple pictures of a typical televising report that we do. Sure.
They actually drive through the pipes and take videotape, and it's a little tractor on a cable, and it's got a headlight, and they actually run through, and you can there's no secrets in the sewer line.
with some of the public replacements that we've been, the infrastructure replacements, we televise all the lines that we're going to redo prior. We locate where the services are, where there's any other issues, and then once that's been replaced, we actually go through, and we guarantee the contractor's work, and we can see any flaws on the new installations also. So it's a very valuable tool. Yep.
Any other discussion on the motion? Kyle, do you want us to do a voice vote on this? So we'll do a voice vote if everybody's ready for a vote. All those in favor of the motion that would authorize the wastewater department to move forward with the purchase of the sewer camera, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. Excuse me.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, guys.
Agenda item number 18. Agenda item number 18 is. Agenda item number 18, consider appointments to various boards and commissions. The council met in special session prior to this meeting, as well as special session 2 weeks ago, and interviewed applicants for various boards and commissions. And based on those interviews, I would recommend that Leland Sorum be appointed to an unexpired term on the Airport Commission that will expire May 31st, 2020. And that Lucas Youngsma be appointed to his first term on the Community Services Advisory Board, and that Melissa Doherty also be appointed to a first term on the Community Services Advisory Board. Both of those terms will end February 28, 2021. I'd offer that as a recommendation to the council and entertain a motion to affirm.
Second.
Motion by Jim, seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 19. Agenda item number 19, consider the application for an exempt permit from Southwest Minnesota State University Foundation for an event April 27th. Are there any questions on this? If not, is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by John, seconded by Craig. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes. Agenda item number 20. Our commission board liaison reports. Fire Relief Association did have their annual meeting this past Tuesday evening. Both Finance Director Drown and I attended that meeting. We can report that the retirement fund for our Marshall Volunteer Firefighters is performing well. We're at a bubble of retirements from that we had. Carly helped me with the number. We've had several this past year. We would anticipate that it could be up to 5 or 6 in the next year to 18 months. Of course, that reduces the amount of the fund, but obviously the fund is healthy and there's adequate funds. So our contribution is determined by formula for 2018, and that is in our approved budget. They did re-elect the trustees, and there was no change in the officers for the Board of Trustees. It's a well-managed fund. Carla, anything you would want to add to that? If anyone would like to see a copy of the annual report, we'd be happy to provide that. Okay. Regional Development Commission, their meeting, which was a week ago Thursday, was actually postponed because of weather conditions. It was held then this past Wednesday of last week, and I was out of town for work and did not attend that. Greg?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Merit Commission, or the Merit Center Board, met last week, and things are progressing out there pretty well. We're focused right now on continued input and garnering support to get hopefully successful results in this year's bonding bill to finish out the second half of the driving track. We had a good discussion and are preparing to potentially go to testify at the hearings at the legislature, and we're continuing to try to identify and build out partnerships for training and utilization of that facility by both the public safety sector and then also industry. So it takes a while to get that up, but the energy is good, and Jasmine's doing a good job of getting a lot of traffic through there. The group is pretty focused. I think we're every month. I think there's a more positive change in the right direction on where we need to go. There seems to be good energy coming out of Minskew, our tenant, and the cooperation. And so far so good, healthy. It's just a matter of getting it in and then getting people in the habit of knowing it's there and using it, both for meetings and training, and for us to continue to try to build either a curriculum that we host or a curriculum that we actually support and operate. And the answer is probably both. So that's all I have for the Merit Center, and the Southwest Minnesota Emergency Communications Board meets later this month. We've actually got a pretty good presentation coming. I believe it's from AT&T and some other interests. So that's moving forward. I'm working on still getting traction on that. That's a pretty technical group, so I've got a lot of learning to do there, but it is moving forward too. So thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Glenn?
The Planning Commission item was item number 4 on the agenda tonight, so we've already acted on that, and that's all I have to report.
EDA did meet. We had some very preliminary discussions of housing incentives to stimulate some additional housing in the area, just really a comparison of what other communities are doing. We've got much more discussion to follow on that. No decisions or whatever made. We're just really talking and doing the information aspect right now. We also accepted an agreement with Webtronics regarding our website hosting and maintenance. It's on an hourly basis, so if need be, we can terminate that at any time, but they are set up to handle our maintenance right now. And then, if you recall, last meeting, the Minnesota Investment Fund discussion, that the one-time fund basically paying a 20% back to free up the funds to any, what's the expression, Dennis? Legal...
Any legal purpose.
Any legal purpose, yeah. And so we had a finishing discussion on that, and as far as the timing, and now we'll be proceeding with some guidelines and policies how we make use of the money that we will be using in there and under the EDA. MMU is probably still meeting right now, so was not able to attend that meeting tonight. So.
Okay. Thank you, John. David?
The Convention and Visitors Bureau met on the 18th, finalized the adoption of the budget for this year and a review of the activity schedule and at the Red Baron Arena and promotions for attracting more events. The other boards have not met during this period.
Thank you. And Jim?
Marshall Area Transit met last week. I know they're trying to work with SMSU on account of how many students use the bus service. Other than that, the other ones did not meet.
Okay. We'll move then to agenda item number 21. Councilmember individual items. Greg, let's start on yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a reminder that tonight there's a special fundraising event at the Red Baron Arena and Expo. to support Jason Ornberg's wife, who is battling cancer. I would encourage everyone to go out and take part in that event tonight and show support. Obviously, Jason's one of our employees, and his wife and him have been longtime community members and very active in events with their kids. And I know they're fighting a pretty tough battle right now, and I think it'd be good for us to go support that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Glenn?
I have nothing.
Jim?
I had somebody bring up interesting subject to visit with Carla about it today, and she may have to help explain it. But since the last 12 months, we haven't had a lot of snow, so this constituent asked, well, what happens to the extra money in the snow budget? Because he says governments they're always told that, well, you have to spend the money. So Carla and I had a visit about that, and maybe you can help kind of explain so people understand what, and it came up because we didn't get any snow yesterday. This guy asked me, so what happens to the extra snow money?
First of all, there's no extra money. Let's clarify that. So in our budget, we have budget line items, and he's talking about the snow removal snow removal is in multiple areas, and for one instance, it's in the street department because our streets need snow removal. But in that line item, there are other items budgeted as well. So another item that's budgeted, happens to be budgeted in there, is tree removal. So if we have trees that need removing, but we are spreading it out possibly over multiple years, and we don't have snow removal, after discussion, we may decide to remove a couple more trees, because that way we've already levied the dollars. And so to best utilize those dollars may be to remove those extra trees, a couple more trees, and then any funds at the end of the year remaining unspent go into our fund balance. And those are then dedicated, we have a fund balance policy, so they can help with our fund balance policy, which currently our fund balance policy is 50% of the next year's budgeted expenses plus a 1-month emergency. So those unspent funds each year will go into our fund balance and help address our fund balance policy, which has been set by the council.
And thank you, Carla, for that explanation. Choose the example of tree removal. That also could have been the example of patching streets and things like that. But since you used the example of tree removal, that's not only the boulevard trees that we're responsible for, but also the trees that are in the riverbank from the western border of the community all the way to Highway 23 by Green Valley. So we're responsible for all of that. So,
and I just thought that'd be a good informational thing for the citizens, because I really didn't know until I was with Carla today, and this asked. To me, it was educational. So educational 101 from Councilmember Lozinski.
If there's not snow removal, we don't send the guys home without pay. They keep working.
It's absolutely perfect timing because they were trimming trees right next to senior center, right behind my office today. Instead of working on the streets, they were trimming trees today.
And I think that was very gracious of Mother Nature to shift this whole storm. I think it was a very good thing. It saves everybody a lot of money.
Anything else, Jim?
No.
David?
Nothing tonight.
John?
Just one item that was not able to attend the reception for Doug Goodman on his retirement. Just get a chance to publicly tell him congratulations on his retirement and thank you for his many years of service.
Very good. Thank you. We'll move then to agenda item number 22. Staff reports. Sharon?
Mr. Mayor and Councilmen, this Friday I'm going to be participating in the first ever middle school career fair on behalf of the city, so I hope to discuss a little bit with 8th graders on why they might want to consider a career with city government, and I look forward to doing that. Also, just a couple other upcoming meetings, and possibly Jason was going to bring this up, but February 1st is the public meeting on Saratoga Street. And it is a public meeting at this point, not a public hearing. It's for informational purposes. February 13th is the next building task force meeting, which we will forward on to you the agenda once we have that put together at 1:30. And then we did schedule the work session as suggested by the mayor on City Hall and street assessments for February 15th at 5:30. One final note, and not to pick them out of the crowd, but tonight we have a couple visitors from SMSU that are here as part of a class assignment. And I know they've been ferociously writing notes. And if they didn't pick something up, they can go to ci.marshall.mn.us, and all the documents that were presented tonight, you can go there and look at the information in case you didn't catch something. So I expect you'll get an A on this assignment following that. That's all I had, Mr. Mayor.
You'll want to report back on their grades, right?
Thank you, Sharon.
Part of the audit.
Yeah.
Jason, we'll move to you.
I think I would just add that we are working on the design process for the Saratoga project, like Sharon mentioned, and the public informational meeting will be at the library at 5:30 on the 1st, if anyone's interested in attending. So, also working on the reconstruct for Marguerite and South Bend. So we're working on putting these projects together, and we'll, I'm sure we'll have a meeting with those property owners as well to discuss that project. So.
And you met with the task force?
Yes, met with the
meetings coming up in February.
That's right. Yep, that's right. Progressing well. We should make some more headway at the next meeting. So.
And Dennis.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. There's several ordinances that will need to be reviewed, amended, maybe deleted. Dealing with telecommunications and right-of-way management by the city, there were significant changes at the legislative session last year, 2017, that we were behind in our ordinances. And there's a new model ordinance that's been prepared through the Minnesota Engineering Association and the League of Minnesota Cities. So I'm reviewing that. That'll be coming out. And building official department committee reviews, yes, there are some suggestions also for some amendments to ordinances there, and I'll be reviewing that. And also working to finalize the punch list for the construction managers out at the Red Baron Arena. The majority of those punch list items can be completed right now during the winter time, but there is exterior caulking and painting that will need yet to be done. So we're hoping to finalize both the construction management punch list and also the final issues with the architect. So those are progressing.
Thank you. So we'll move then to agenda item number 25, the pending agenda items. Any questions about the pending agenda items? If not, agenda item number 26 is the informational items, including the building permits. Agenda item number 27 is the upcoming meetings. We'll note the updated calendars, which brings us then to agenda item number 28. Consider adjourning. I would entertain a motion.
So move.
Motion by Craig, seconded by David to adjourn. Discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Motion passes.
Sharon, just a side note, thank you for the updated schedule and you know, your emails and updates. Really appreciate that. That is very helpful.